sometime soon. How about tomorrow?
Well, good morning. I want to start with a confession this morning. Is that okay? Am I among friends today? Good. So my confession is, I love money. I love money. How about you? Anybody care to admit with me? Yeah, I love money. I love money. I love what it enables me to do, right, for one thing. Money allows me to buy things that I want. It allows me to go places that I want to go, and I love it. So there it is. There's my confession. I've worn this green sweater in honor of money this morning. Thank you to those of you who knew we were starting this new series today and have done so as well. So we all have a relationship with money. And I wonder, how is your relationship? Would you describe your relationship with money as being healthy? Is it kind of on the rocks, unhealthy? Or would you just say, you know what, Josh, when it comes to me and money, my relationship is complicated. And so we're just going to leave it at that. We all have a relationship with money, and money also has significant impact on our relationships, right? If you've been together with another person for any length of time where you have had to make cooperative decisions regarding your money, chances are there have been from time to time some tension with some of those decisions. Maybe even it rose to the level of an argument or a fight, right? Because you saw things differently, had different perspectives on some particular decision that you wanted to make with regard to your money. So money is a big deal, obviously. It's a big part of our lives. Did you know that money is also a significant part of what the Bible talks about? It has a major theme in Scripture. Back in, I think, the 70s, there was a guy by the name of Howard Dayton, who's a businessman, and he went through the Bible with a desire to catalog every verse in Scripture that had something to do with or to say about money and possessions. And you know what he came up with? You can see this work online. It's really fascinating. He cataloged and categorized, all of these scriptures about money into their various categories. But there were, at the end of the day, 2,350 verses of the Bible that talked about money and possessions. How many of you'd say Jesus was important and the things that Jesus taught? So in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have a lot of stories that Jesus told. We call them parables, right? They're these object lesson stories. And there are 38 of them that we can read and learn from. Did you know that 16 of those 38 parables that Jesus told have to do with money and possessions? That's a pretty high percentage of Jesus' parables, is it not? You think about all the things that Jesus could have talked about, things like prayer and faith and heaven and hell. These four topics combined, Jesus didn't talk about those things as much as he did talk about money and possessions. So money is a big deal. It's a big deal. It's all around us. And so in this series, we're going to let money do some talking for us. Kind of like how money was personified in this cute little video. The question that we're looking at is, if money could talk, what might it say to us? What kind of advice might it give to us? So let me get back to my confession. My confession was and is, I love money. How about you? So I want to look at really quickly as an introduction this one verse of Scripture in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10. 1 Timothy was a letter that was written by the Apostle Paul to a protege of his by the name of Timothy, who was kind of like this next generation of church leaders, following the apostles who, of course, followed Jesus. And so Paul wrote a couple letters to Timothy, giving him some advice and instruction on how to lead the people that God was putting within his pastoral care. And in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, written nearly 2,000 years ago, here's what the Apostle Paul said. He said to Timothy, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people, craving money, have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows." Now, I just want to look for a few moments at what this verse is telling us, because it's something that's going to come up over the next few weeks, and we really need to understand it. The first thing I notice, and the first thing I think you should notice, is that the scripture does not say that money is evil. We have to understand that money in and of itself is not evil. It is not inherently evil. You might be carrying around some dollar bills in your wallet, in your pocketbook at this very moment. Those material objects are just that. They are not in and of themselves loaded with anything spiritual, right? They are simply matter. They are simply an object. Paul did not say that money is evil or that money is the cause of evil. No, what he said was that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Because what we're going to discover today and in the weeks to come is that money is a tool, right? Money is it is a tool that is kind of within our operation, that is within our lives to be used for a certain purpose. The problem is that you and I oftentimes fall in love with money, right? And at the outset here, we're saying, well, I love money, and who doesn't, right? I mean, after all, money is a great and wonderful thing. And who wouldn't want more of it if given the opportunity, right? How many of you would turn down the opportunity to have more money if it were just afforded to you? Like, chances are none of us would do that. Right? Because more money means more stuff. More money means more opportunity. More money means more things that I can do. The problem is when I fall in love with that money. Many of the evils that are out there, and we can observe in our world all kinds of different evils. Right? All kinds of different evils that we can look at and talk about and whiteboard and list, right? And some of those evils we have experienced, some of those evils we have observed, some of those evils we ourselves have committed. And the Bible here tells us that many of those evils are inspired by and are the result of the love of money. The love of money is the root cause, or is a root cause for so many of the evils and injustices that exist in our world today. Now, when Paul says and talks about the love of money, we can look at it from the angle of like what it was like to be in love, or what it's like to be in love with somebody else. Think back to your high school days and this person that you just fell madly in love with, right? And what did those feelings evoke in you? As you're in love with them, chances are you had a great deal of affection for that person. Perhaps when you were separated from that person, your mind was still preoccupied, right? Because so great was your affection for that person, right? That kind of love is sometimes the love that we have when it comes to money, that we have this great deal of affection for it, that our minds are preoccupied by it. But did you know that love can also exist even when we can't quite get our hands around money? Again, going back to high school, maybe there was a person that you were kind of in love with, that you were infatuated with, but that feeling was not reciprocated, right? It was just a fantasy that you and that boy, that girl could actually be together. But again, like it created this infatuation with you. You were attracted to the glamour, to the fantasy, the idea that maybe we could be together. And sometimes that's how it is when it comes to our money, right? Because, as I look across the room here, chances are there are representatives from a whole bunch of different socioeconomic classes, right? As the world would kind of categorize us. Some of you might be people who have a great deal of money. Some of you might have a sort of average level of money for our society. Some of you might have very little money. And so you have very little money. You're like, well, I mean, there's this preoccupation sometimes with the idea of having more of it. Problem with that is that those feelings, those ideas, they lead to some really dangerous things like, first of all, covetousness. Right? Covetousness is one of the things that we have to be constantly on guard against. Covetousness it's the comparison game that we play. It's the game that we play where another person has something or some things that we wish we had. I'm not happy with my house. I wish I had their house. I'm not happy with the stuff that I have. I wish I had their stuff. I'm not happy with my paycheck. I wish I had their paycheck, right? And that leads to another kind of really, really difficult thing in our lives, and that's discontentment. Well, how many of us are living discontent with what we have been blessed with? And if we were really honest, if we really had a firm grip on reality, regardless of whether your income numbers in the tens of thousands or in the hundreds of thousands, whether you're a five-figure or six-figure kind of person, regardless of the house you live in and the car you drive, the reality is that everybody in this room, we all live far, far, far better than the majority of people in this world. So blessed are we. And yet, still we covet and still we live discontented. So money is not evil. The love of money is. The love of money is always the problem. And so what if our money could talk to us? What might our money say? This week, I want to look at this principle. And that is that if money could talk, perhaps it would say to us, I can add meaning to your life, but I am not the meaning of life. Again, in looking at money as a tool, right, that's a different kind of association with money than what we read about in 1 Timothy chapter 6. That verse described money as sort of an end. Right, it talked about how, some people, they love money so much, they wander away from the true faith because of their desire to have more of it. And because of their love for it, they do whatever they have to do to get it. And it becomes the end. But what money would say to us, the advice that it would give us is, listen, I am not an end in and of myself. I am not the destination. The idea is that at the end, you have more and much of me, you're going to find yourself very, very disappointed. Right? Paul said that the journey for that person who has wandered away from the faith because of their love for money, it ends in many sorrows. He speaks of them piercing themselves by the choices they make. Why? Well, because that journey where money and possessions are an end themselves and not a tool that adds meaning and significance to our lives, but rather the end themselves, that journey is usually littered with collateral damage that comes from broken relationships. Right? The effort to which we have to go to get and to have and to keep and to protect and to add to, it just creates all kinds of collateral damage when it comes to the relationships of our lives. It becomes the priority. You think about all the priorities that we have in our lives, right? And we can rank them in order of importance. When money becomes the priority, the true priorities of our lives always suffer. You ever been to a funeral and somewhere within the context of that funeral service, a person gets up and starts talking about the net worth of the person who's just deceased? You ever see somebody kind of look at, hey, let's spend a few moments just celebrating the numbers of what Johnny earned in his life? And they start looking at the checkbook balance and the savings account balance and the retirement balance. They start looking at all the toys that they accumulated. Never do you leave a funeral, right, and follow in a procession to that person's mansion to take a tour of their lovely home, where you get to look at all the wonderful stuff. Why? Because they've left it behind. It's gone. It is detached from them. No, at a funeral service, what we tend to do is we talk about the stories surrounding that person's life. We talk about the significance that that person had in the lives of others. The money, the possessions, they mean nothing. And so what you and I have to do, what we have to decide on, the decision that we have to make, is we have to decide whether or not our money is going to have actual meaning, whether it's going to add meaning to our lives. That is a decision we all have to make. I'm going to ask some of you this morning to perhaps make that decision for the first time in your life. The decision that I am not going to let money and possessions be the end of my life, but rather I am going to make the decision that my money, that my stuff is actually going to have meaning and significance by the way in which I use it. That's what this series is all about, how to do that better, how to do that well. So we have to deal with the elephant in the room. If we're going to come to this place where we can start seeing money not as an end, but as a tool that adds meaning to our lives, but is not the meaning of life itself, we have to deal with the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is this thing called greed. It's greed. Greed's our problem, right? And when I say greed, I'm talking about greed as the assumption that everything we have is all for me, and it's all for you. Greed is the assumption that everything I have is for me to decide with what I'm going to do. And that greed comes out of, or comes from, some pretty good reasons why I should feel like it's all for me. For one thing, I could say, well, I've earned it. Right? The stuff that I have, the money that I have, I've earned it. In fact, I've worked hard. I've worked really, really hard for it. I've sacrificed for it, and therefore, it's mine to do with as I please. If I want, I will spend it on something that I want. If I want to, I will pay debts that I have accumulated for stuff that I've wanted in the past. If I want, I will save it for things that I'm going to want in the future, right? That's greed. Greed is the assumption that it's all for me to do with as I please. And listen, greed, I know greed's a big, dark, scary, awful word, right? And none of us would ever want to admit to the fact that we are greedy, right? Because it just sounds so dirty and awful. But like when I talk about greed, I'm not talking about greed in like what we often associate, just this otherworldly kind of lavish sense of greed. Like I'm not talking about when you turn on the television, I'm going to date myself here, but when you turn on the television and watch the program Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, right? Where now you're given a tour of this person's gaudy home with all their gaudy stuff, and you're almost left to feel sick to your stomach at the greed and the selfishness and the self-absorption that person must have, who's willing to live that level of lifestyle, knowing all of the needs out there in the world, right? That's not what I'm talking about, right? Chances are none of us, maybe none of us, few of us at best, but none of us probably are like living with that kind of greed. I'm not talking about greed in this otherworldly, like that's a problem for other people. I'm talking about the kind of greed that you and I deal with every single day of our lives. Greed doesn't have to be some big, sick story. Where we find whether or not we are greedy, where we discover whether or not there's greed in our lives, we find it in the extra that we have available to us. We find it in answering the question, what do I do with the extra? Now, when I talk about extra, some of you immediately excuse yourself. And you say, hey, if you were to look at my checking account, my credit card statements, and my expenses and my income, you would know that I don't have any extra. So I'm just going to take the next few moments off from this sermon. But the reality, again, given the way in which we live our lives, chances are you probably do have extra, regardless of where you are in terms of your income. Don't raise your hand, but have you ever walked into a cell phone store and purchased a cell phone? And in exchange for that cell phone that the associate has given you, you give to them a perfectly fine, working, operable cell phone. Anybody ever done that? Again, don't raise your hand. Hey, most of us have done that. You got to upgrade, right? All that, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that means we have extra. The reality that I have a cable bill, like I don't wear cable. I don't eat or drink cable. I don't live in cable, right? That is an extra thing that I've added to my life because I really love watching football, etc. So if we're really honest, we all have extra. We do. And the question is, well, what do I do with the extra? What decisions am I making with the extra? And it's going to highlight whether or not, or to what extent, greed is part of our lives. What I want to do, listen, my object today and in the next few weeks, my object is not to make you feel like unnecessarily guilty about anything you're doing. The object of what I'm doing, we're going to talk about financial principles that I think if we follow these principles, we will be better for it. Like our lives will be more enriched. Our lives will be more full. Our lives will have more of what is eternally significant. If we follow the principles that we are given when it comes to stewardship and management of our finances, I really, really believe that. So it's not about making you feel guilty. It's not about me trying to assert control. Like some of you might have walked in here, sort of like not wanting to, because church is not a thing that you normally do. And church isn't a thing that you normally do because you think, all they ever do is talk about money. That's all they ever do. Well, unfortunately for you, if that's your feeling, you're right. For the next 4 weeks, you are correct, right? Because that's what we're going to be doing in this series. But it's not with the object of making you feel unnecessarily bad about anything you're doing or not doing. The point is that money is a tool that has been put at our disposal, and we get to make the decision whether or not that money is going to have significance and meaning in our lives. And I want to give you the opportunity. I want to open your minds and your hearts up to the possibility of what amazing meaning both your money and your life can actually have. So that when we get to the end, we're not like looking back with a whole bunch of regret. Nobody's ever going to get to the end of their lives and say, you know what? I wish I hadn't given so much. As I really think about it, I gave too much away. I was far too generous. No, nobody ever says that. It's always the opposite. So I want to look at a really kind of weird, I'll be honest, it's kind of a weird story. It's one of Jesus' parables. It's weird, it's a little confusing, but it highlights, I think, some important points about money for us. It's found in Luke chapter 16. Luke 16, verses 1 through 14. Let me read it for you. Jesus told this story to his disciples. There was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. Okay, so Jesus introduces us to this guy who's got so much wealth, so much money, he can't even manage it all himself. He has to actually hire out stewards who are going to manage his things for him. Well, one day a report came that the manager was wasting his employer's money. Right? So whether through fraud or negligence or some form of dishonesty, this manager was misappropriating the possessions and money that belonged to his boss. So the employer called him in and said, "What is this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you are going to be fired." The manager thought to himself, "Now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength to dig ditches, and I am too proud to beg." In other words, there's nothing out there for me. If I don't have this job, I'm not going to have any job. And so he says, what am I going to do about this predicament? And he says, I know. I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I am fired. When I'm not able to provide for myself, I know how I can ingratiate myself to others so that they will take care of me when I can't take care of myself. So he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss their situation, their indebtedness. So he asked the first one, "How much do you owe my boss?" The man replied, "I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil." Anybody ever been in debt? 800 gallons of oil. No? Good. All right. "I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil." So the manager told him, "Take the bill and quickly change it to 400 gallons. What is going on here? What is going on? "Well, how much do you owe my employer?" he asked the next man. The next man said, "I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat." "Here," the manager said, "take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. Here's where it gets weird. The rich man, right, the boss, the guy who owns all the stuff, had to admire the dishonest rascal. Thank you, New Living Translation, for using the word rascal. As far as I'm concerned, a far too little leveraged word in our vernacular. The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And then Jesus comes out of the story and makes this observation. He says, "And it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of the light." What is going on here? Right here you have this dishonest manager who's been fired, who's been told, hey, wrap things up, right? Make your final reports, get your stuff together, and then get out of here. And he goes and he begins bringing in all the debtors and rewriting the bills. Again, we know that he's doing it for the purpose that when he leaves that employment, this person that had their bill reduced from 800 gallons of oil to 400 gallons of oil is going to help him out, is going to be there for him. This person who owed 1,000 bushels of wheat, who now just owes 800 bushels of wheat, he's going to be indebted to that person who has made his debt even smaller, right? And on it went. Presumably, he did this with everybody that owed his master money. So what's going on? What's going on is that this dishonest manager realized that he had only a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity. Right? When he came to his senses, after getting the bad news that he was about to be fired, immediately he recognized, listen, I just have a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity. He realized something that most of us don't when it comes to money, and that is that we only have a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity. Listen to what he said to that first man who owed the 800 gallons of oil. He said, quickly, change your bill to 400. Quickly, why? Well, because he only had a little bit of time. And he knew the time was short. He had the future in mind. He was forward thinking with how he was going to provide for and take care of himself, right? And this was his solution. Now, Jesus is not applauding what the dishonest person did. He is not condoning at all any of what this dishonest manager is responsible for doing. What Jesus is pointing out is something very, very important. He said that the children of this world are more shrewd. That is, they seem to have a better understanding and deal more wisely with the world around them than do the children of the light. Well, what does that mean? I think at least in part, it means that Jesus says that for the children of the world, right, these that he categorizes as people that are just living for this world. That is, for some, life exists between the events of birth and death, and that's it. For a child of this world, like Jesus would say, that to that person, all that matters is what happens between birth and death. And Jesus says that person is actually acting more consistently with what they believe. They don't believe that prior to their birth, they were conceived in the eternal mind and plan of God. Like, if you're a follower of Jesus, that's what you believe, that's what you understand. That your existence didn't begin with your physical birth, but rather, you were eternally conceived in the mind and the plan of God. And furthermore, the child of the world, when death occurs, that's it. All they see is themselves as a random collection of molecules that experience life between birth and death, and there's nothing afterward. And so you know what makes sense? What makes sense is for that person to live greedily. That's what makes sense. Right? Because greed is that survival instinct in us that says, take care of yourself, consume it, enjoy it, secure it, get more of it. Like, that makes sense. If all that matters is what happens between when I am born and when I die, well, then I should do everything I can to get as much of it as I possibly can. Why wouldn't I? Right? So Jesus is saying, like, that's a consistent methodology there. And so that person acts more shrewdly with their understanding of finances than do the children of the light. What does that mean? Well, it means the child of the light, right? This category of person that Jesus is talking about that believes in something more than just this temporal, physical world that we live in, that understands the concept of eternity and the reality that death is not the end, right? It's just the launching point for the rest of eternity. For that person who actually believes that believes that there is an eternity to spend with God and in the presence of Jesus, for them to live greedily like the child of the world, it doesn't make any sense. Those two things they're not compatible. They don't go together. It's not in alignment with what I believe. For me to live with greed, for me to live as if it's all for me, For me to live as if I get to be the boss of everything that I have and everything that I earn, it is not consistent with a belief that there is something beyond this physical life. And so, when we have the same MO as a child of the world who's just living for this present physical life, to get as much out of it as they possibly can, to squeeze out of those handful of years as much as they possibly can, when we adopt that as our MO, we are living inconsistently with what we claim to believe, which is that there's something beyond this life, something that is bigger than this life. So, how are we supposed to view money? How are we supposed to see money? What's our perspective supposed to be when it comes to money? Our perspective is supposed to be that money is not the end. It is not the end goal. The accumulation of money and possessions is not the thing that is going to bring meaning to my life, but rather, money has, as a tool, it has the opportunity to add meaning to my life. When I make the decision, when you make the decision that my money is going to be meaningful, it's going to be significant. Jesus goes on. He says, here's the lesson. This is weird. It's just going to get weirder, okay? He says, here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home, right? Here, Jesus is starting to more specifically point out that there is some kind of eternal matter at stake. Like there's something about eternity that's at stake here. He points out that there's going to come a point when your possessions are gone. Sometimes we lose our possessions through tragedy, right? Like the loss of a job or getting ourselves in over our heads financially. There are a number of ways in which we can lose everything, but for most of us, we're going to run out of time way before we run out of money. I know all the retirement planners are trying to, help you understand how important it is to save up, X amount of dollars with the projection that you're going to live X number of years, right? And so we have that as a goal in our lives. Chances are, most of us, if not all of us, we're going to run out of time before we run out of money. Jesus says, when your possessions are gone, like there's going to come a time when our possessions are gone. When this life is over, I take not a dollar bill with me. I take not one fun toy with me. I don't take my house, my car. I don't take any of it with me. I am removed. I am separated from that. And that stuff doesn't mean anything anymore. So, I believe what Jesus would have us understand is that what I do with my money right now makes an eternal difference. I can't tell you exactly how or why or like how that all works. But one thing that we see over and over and over again, both in the Gospels and really in all of the Bible, is this financial principle that the decisions I make with my money right now make an eternal difference. Greed asks the question, how can money benefit me? Right? That's what greed does. Greed invites me to ask myself, how can this benefit me? How can this take care of me? But Jesus, he asks the question, how can your money and your possessions benefit others? How can it benefit others? Like there's the difference. So I have right now at my disposal, I have money and I have possessions. A time will come when I don't have them anymore. And so the question is, what will I have to show for at that time? When I no longer have my balance sheet, when I no longer have my net worth, when I no longer have the stuff that people could look at and say, oh, wow, look how well he's done. Look how well she's done for herself. What I do with my money now makes an eternal difference. Here's what Jesus says. He goes on. He says, if you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? Some of us, we get lost in this idea, this concept that, eternity or heaven is, it's just about, we die and then we sprout wings and we get a halo and we play a harp on a cloud somewhere. And that's not eternity at all. Eternity is a meaningful existence where we continue to partner with God in the responsibilities that he gives to us and the privileges that he gives to us. It's not too much unlike what it's like for us here in this world, right? Because here Jesus says, if you are untrustworthy with worldly wealth, like what Jesus would say, like the money that you have, no matter how much you have of it, no matter how big your house is, no matter how wonderful your car is, comparatively, it's just a little insignificant thing. And if you can't be trustworthy with the management of that little insignificant thing, who's going to trust you with the true riches of heaven? What are those true riches? I don't know. All I know is that the decisions I make today with my money and my stuff, it makes an eternal difference. He says, if you're not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with the things that aren't your own? No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. And so what we learn from all that is this very, very important principle, and that is that money, at the end of the day, the money, the possessions that you and I have, it's a test. It's a test. The reality that I can't keep it, I can't take it with me. You know what that means? That means necessarily that it's not mine. I'm only managing it. And, you might have a difference of opinion depending on your perspective of God and the universe and all that. You might have a varying perspective on who you're managing it for. If you feel like you're just chance collection of molecules that have randomly been put together in this random chaotic universe, and all that there is in this life. The reality is, when you die, you don't take it anywhere with you. And so you're managing it for somebody else. You're going to be managing it for the people that are going to jump in and snag all the stuff and all the money after you. Or if you have the perspective that God created us and that God has given us a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity, a little bit of his creation, that we are responsible to manage, to steward. If that's your understanding, well, then you see money is a test. Money is a test, and we only get a little bit of time, and we only get a little bit of opportunity to do well with it. Because at some point, practically every test we've ever taken in our lives, at some point, the voice is going to come from the front of the room that says, all right, everybody, pencils down. Time is up. It's time to turn it in. So if money could talk, it would say, you know what? Here's my advice for you. I can add meaning to your life, but I am not the meaning of my life. Don't get those two things confused. So how can we start to actually let money add meaning to our lives? Maybe if we want to make money the tool, if we want to make money have meaning and significance, maybe we can ask ourselves this: well, what would give real meaning to my life? What would make me feel like my life has real meaning? My life does not have meaning because I'm able to upgrade to a bigger house or to a better phone, or a bigger TV, a better car, my first boat ever, right? None of those things make my life meaningful. So what would give real meaning to your life? And in trying to answer that question, maybe you could say, well, what would I want people to celebrate about me? If I were able to fast forward into the future, I've died, there I am in the casket or the urn, everybody's gathered around sharing their stories about me. What is it that I would want people to celebrate about me? What would I be honored to have people line up to thank me for in the end? Right? These are good questions. Or what is it that is breaking your heart? What is it, like we talked about all kinds of evil that exists in our world. What is it that is breaking your heart? What is it that you have noticed? What is it that you have observed? What is it that you, if you were to make the decision, you could help do something about? What's breaking your heart that you can do something about by, again, using your money as a tool to actually step in and make a difference? Or what is God's Spirit nudging you toward with regard to your money? Again, this is not about me like trying to make you feel guilty or to give you a whole bunch of rules and regulations about, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. If you're going to be a good Christian, this is what you better do with your money. What I want is, I want for us to open ourselves up to the voice of God's Spirit, who most of the time, he nudges us in a direction. He pushes us along. He says, here's where I want you to go. Here's what I want you to do. So what is it that God's nudging you about with regard to your money and your stuff? And how are you being either obedient or disobedient to those promptings? At the end of the day, these are your decisions. These are your decisions. It is your decision to decide whether or not money is going to be an end in itself or if money is going to be a tool to add meaning to your life. Let me close with the reaction of some of the people that were listening to this little story that Jesus told. Luke 16, verse 14 closes with, the Pharisees, who dearly loved their money, heard all this, and they scoffed at him. The reality is, depending on the decision we want to make with regard to our money, we can have the reaction much like the Pharisees did. And just, he doesn't know what he's talking about. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know how hard I've worked to get where I am. Is that going to be our reaction, or will we listen to the nudging, the prompting, the voice of the Spirit that I believe God wants for us to pay attention to this morning? The band's going to lead us in this song. And it talks about how like God doesn't give himself to us in pieces. He doesn't give us his heart in pieces. God does not separate portions of himself, but rather God gives all of him to each of us. What it means to follow Jesus is we surrender all of who we are to him. We don't always do that. And when it comes to something as big and as important and as private and as kind of essential to our lives as our money, like that's an area where we often really, really struggle. But let me just tell you, God wants all of you. He wants all of me this morning. Not a portion, not, hey God, you can have this area of my life, but I'm going to hold on to this stuff. He wants all of us. So as we sing the song, I pray that you just be encouraged by the reality of what God has done in your life, what God is doing in your life, what God wants to be in your life. And I want to challenge you to reciprocate and say, you know what, God? I want to give you all of me. I want to surrender all of who I am to you. I don't want to give pieces of my heart to you. God, I want to give all of you, all of me to who you are. Let's sing the song together.